So with Assassin's Creed Mirage coming out in about a month here, there's going to be a big influx of new players to this series. It happens every time there's a new game. And with Mirage being the series' 13th main entry, not even including all the spin-offs and DLCs, it can be very overwhelming for a new player to get into and even know where to start. So this video is meant to aid those new players who are trying to get into Assassin's Creed and want to know where to start. And I think that varies for the kind of experience each person wants and the type of understanding they want. For example, if you're thinking about buying Mirage as one of your first Assassin's Creed games, but want some understanding of the lore and Basim as a character, the protagonist of Mirage, then you could play Valhalla beforehand. That's, as of now, the newest game, and Basim is a pretty prominent character in it. So if you want some understanding of who Basim is, then Valhalla will give you just that. In my opinion, he's also easily the best character in that game. Although I will mention Mirage is essentially a prequel, so in Mirage we'll be getting Basim's origin story, while in Valhalla he's already older. Now personally, I wouldn't recommend this option. There are much better games to start with than Valhalla, and if Valhalla is your first Assassin's Creed game, you're not going to get the best understanding of the lore and what exactly the Assassin's Creed even is, considering it doesn't formally exist yet in Valhalla. So that would make the obvious best place to start the very first Assassin's Creed game. It's almost 16 years old at this point, so it may not be overly appealing to new players, but it's a fantastic place to start. You get introduced to the lore, the creed, and you get a good understanding of what it means to be an assassin. Not to mention, it's the beginning of a long-running modern-day plotline that spans over several games. Now, like I said, the age of the game may turn new players away from it. All things considered though, it's aged pretty well. It still feels dated in some areas and obviously doesn't have the best graphics, but for those who are willing to look past that, it's still well worth it. And then from AC1, you can just go through the games in complete chronological order. Something important to consider about this series is that for the most part, a lot of the games work fine as standalones. You can realistically play any Assassin's Creed game and still understand what's happening for the most part. It's not one of those series where you absolutely have to play every game chronologically to understand what's happening. However, especially in the earlier entries, the games do connect and reference each other a lot, especially the first 5 games of the series. So starting with AC1, then AC2, after that it's Brotherhood and Revelations, and then finally Assassin's Creed 3. And yes, the way these games are titled can be a bit confusing and overwhelming for somebody new to the series, I'm sure. But if you want a full connected and cohesive story across these games, start with AC1 and play all the way through AC3. There's an overarching plotline that begins in AC1 and eventually resolves in AC3. It's also worth mentioning that Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations is something we refer to as the Ezio trilogy. That's because all 3 of these games follow the same main character, Ezio, and through those 3 games you essentially get to see his entire life story. He's the only main character in this entire series to have sequels. All the other games have a new protagonist each time. A lot of people consider the Ezio trilogy as the best era of Assassin's Creed games, so again, I'd recommend starting with AC1, then you go into the Ezio trilogy with AC2, then Brotherhood, and finally Revelations, and then you play AC3, which follows a new protagonist, but it's kind of the grand finale to that entire modern day arc that began in the first game. I really hope I'm not confusing you guys. I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can. But for those who just absolutely refuse to play a 16-year-old game, fair enough, that's your preference, then I have some other recommendations on where to start. If you want a game that looks really good graphically, but still serves as a good introduction into the series, I'd actually suggest Assassin's Creed Unity as a starting point. Not only does it look incredible visually, especially for a 9-year-old game, it looks a lot lot better than most games coming out today, but it also does a good job of reintroducing you to the Assassin's Creed and a lot of the lore. Unity has a very passionate fan base these days, and if you're someone who isn't willing to play the older games, it's absolutely a good option for you. Although I will say, if you want the full understanding and context for Unity, you could play AC Rogue beforehand, as some of the events in that game lead into Unity. But that's not entirely necessary to still understand and enjoy Unity for what it is. Now, another way you could go about playing this series is by timeline. This gets very confusing because the timeline for this series is so out of order now. The newer games have actually been taking place before the original ones. So AC Odyssey takes place in 400 BC ancient Greece. That's the farthest back the series goes. Then Assassin's Creed Origins takes place around 40 BC in ancient Egypt. It's called AC Origins because it's the origin story of the Assassin's Creed. So if you wanted to start with Origins, that's a viable option as well. Though I'd still recommend beginning with the first game, because while Origins is the origin story, there's still quite a lot that changes between Origins and AC1. And then you're probably wondering, well, if Origins is the origin story, then how come Odyssey takes place before it? Yeah, I don't know either. None of us really do. Odyssey doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the general AC lore. There's hints of it in there, but you're not going to get a good understanding of what the series is about with Odyssey. To some, that may be fine. If you just want a fun open world RPG, then Odyssey is likely the game for you. If you want to try and get a grasp on the lore and the story though, it's not a good starting option. I'm so sorry if this is getting too complicated or overwhelming. Blame Ubisoft for their lack of direction. I'm trying my best here. So let me use some visuals to make it easier. First, we have my recommended way of playing through the series, which is just the order the games were released. That really is the best and most simple way to understand everything. You could try to go by a timeline like this, but there's not really too much benefit from that. If you just want a fun, solid starting point without having to play all the older games, I think Unity and Origins would serve you well. And again, if you just want the full context for Basim's character to prepare for AC Mirage, then play Valhalla. It's also worth mentioning that this series has kind of strayed from what it originally was. If you've watched any of the promotional material for Mirage, they keep using the phrase a return to roots, which essentially means the game is supposed to be a bit smaller, more focused on things like stealth, parkour, and a narrative-driven experience, going for the more action-adventure type of game, similar to the originals, because the last three games, being Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, have been more RPG-focused, with tons of gear, side quests, a massive world, leveling, some have dialogue choices. It's very different from what the series initially was. And there's been a huge rift in the community ever since, with fans of the old games versus fans of the new. But Mirage is promising to be more like those old games, which is why they're leaning so heavily into that return to roots. I'm not here to tell you whether you should prefer the old games or the new. Heck, you can enjoy both. Plenty of people do. I'm just simply trying to give you all the vital information so you can make the best decision for yourself based on your own preferences. And we can even break up the series based on the style of games. For example, the first 4 play very similarly, then 3 through Rogue, Unity, and Syndicate, and finally what I like to call the RPG trilogy, with Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla feeling pretty similar to each other. And then Mirage will have similar assets and gameplay mechanics from Valhalla, but will be more in the style of the original game. So I hope all of this helps you new players out there make some sense of things. This can be a very overwhelming and confusing series to get into. Even if you didn't understand everything I tried to explain in this video, I'm hoping you still got a good idea of which game you want to start with and the best order to play through the games for you. A lot of my regular audience probably already knew all of this, but it's important to help new people get into the series. That's how it grows, after all. So if you find anybody in need down in the comments, I encourage you guys to try and help them out if possible, or let me know if you found this video helpful. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. Special thank you to all of my members for supporting me, and other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.